Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. Sona and I just recorded the Severance recap for season 2, episode 1, just yesterday. I'm probably going to space this out a little bit in publishing it, but this is, just jam packed right now. So many things. I don't know if it's because of the writer's strike or what, but I remember this time last year, literally not being able to find anything to discuss on the podcast. This is probably around the time that Mr. and Mrs. Smith came out. We were just talking about that in the last episode. That was seemed like the first time in a while that I had even found anything to watch on TV. Well, not the case this year, where we have so many things premiering, big, high-profile things premiering here in January, and wrapping up, of course, with The Agency, just a week away from wrapping up. A few things I wanted to follow up on. First of all, we were discussing in numerous times The Truth Will Set You Free, the title of last week's episode. And it wasn't until after the episode, when I was just Googling the proper syntax for the phrase, that it popped up on my Google search that this is actually, it's a passage from the Bible, which I kind of knew, but it's actually in the headquarters for CIA in Washington, D.C., which of course is interesting, of course, because of this show.
So interesting, yes.
And it adds a little layer to this as well, which of course is like a mantra for the CIA itself, but also when you think about an organization that, is about subterfuge and lying, for lack of a better term, using that as their placard on the front of the building. And I'm not sure exactly what that indicates, what they're trying to indicate there, if it's an ironic statement or not. Although thematically, definitely there was some truth telling last week, but of course, question remains even now whether that turned out to be the right choice for some of these characters.
Absolutely.
Specifically for Sammy, as we get into this.
Oh boy.
Okay, the second thing I wanted to mention was we got a review, and I wanted to talk about, and I should have put some notation on this in last week's episode, that we had some audio issues, as often is the case. We are in the 21st century, and I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and even some of these professional podcasters that have dedicated equipment, producers and sound technicians sometimes have audio issues. And the critique in the review was that I was talking over Sona, basically, that I was, her volume was lower and I was talking over her. And the reality is, yes, that was the case. In that particular episode, there was an issue where my actual conversation, the things I was saying, were feeding back to me. And the easiest way to remove that from an audio file is to use ducking, which just means that when one file is active, the other one is not. So, of course, I was suppressing Sona's feed across the board. So you obviously experienced that. It irritated this reviewer. And yes, you were correct in that. But it was not my intention. It was not my intention to suppress Sona's insights.
First of all, I am so grateful for anybody who leaves a review indicating they would like to hear more of my voice, because that is not the typical review that we get. So I am so grateful for that. Second, I just want to take this moment to talk about a concept that I learned maybe last year, maybe the year before, called cooperative overlap, which I was so excited about. Have you heard that term? Yeah, I think I'm very much a person who engages in cooperative overlap, which is not to be confused with interrupting somebody because you think what you have to say is more important than, or more interesting than what they're saying, but more that you are so excited about what's being said that you want to join into. And I think I am very much a cooperative overlapper. So probably, this audio issue was particularly significant for that reason.
So anybody who doesn't know this, by the way, I edit the episodes as well. So we don't have an editor or sound technician. So the reason I mentioned that is because I very much will intentionally, sometimes if I'm cutting you off or vice versa, I will clean that up. But when there is this cooperative overlap, I leave it in there. That's the reason I keep the audio files as two separate files. But it probably did sound different in last week's episode, but and I should have included some indication that the audio quality may not be great. But I do appreciate, by the way, that the reviewer gave us 4 stars because the content was good, but the production was bad, which I agree. So thank you. As opposed to some reviews we've had in the past where it's like, I love your show and I listen to it every week, but you mispronounced someone's name. 1 star. So I appreciate the 4 star versus a more egregious score. Thank you. One more thing that I wanted to bring up was, and I've discussed this with you already, Sona, and I want to bring it up for a specific reason, although I don't agree with the sentiment, but I do appreciate the feedback. We got an email from our listener, Jay, who was talking about, politely, by the way, the tone of the email was not angry, was thinking of the criticism we've made multiple times that we felt Martian and Sammy don't have really good chemistry. And they questioned the fact whether we maybe were having issues because of the difference between the races of the characters. And to be totally honest, I actually do, especially in the edit, sometimes listen to the conversations and wonder if people may take that the wrong way. I assume if one person was motivated to contact us, this is probably something that other people have thought as well. And
That's so
I did defend,
interesting.
as I mentioned, I do have a sensitivity to it as well because I do listen to a lot of other podcasts. And there is definitely, and this is probably something that the listener was sensitive to, there is definitely a really toxic, often reaction online when there are interracial relationships. And I always check IMDb, Internet Movie Database, for their audience scores to get a feel for it. And sometimes I'll be surprised that a show has such a low score. And then what I'll do is you can actually see the individual votes. And you can always tell when there is this kind of review bombing of a particular title, because unlike having, a nice bell curve, it'll be like all the votes are aggregated around the 8s and the 7s. And then there's a huge spike at 1. Just a bunch of, which is completely like not the way a regular distribution would look, obviously. And of course, it oftentimes, especially maybe not so much in the most recent history, but definitely about a year ago, 2 years ago, there was this really like a strategy among a certain section of the internet audience to review bomb certain political ideologies. Could be gay characters, it could be interracial couples.
The woke agenda. Yeah.
Yes, exactly that. I understand where someone could see the sensitivity to it. Just to talk about it for a moment more, I mentioned this in my response that this particular actress, I've seen her in a movie that I recommended here. It's an excellent movie, one of my favorite movies of the past few years, called After Yang. It's an interracial relationship with Colin Farrell, and they have great chemistry with each other. I thought they felt like very much like a married couple. So I don't think it's across the board a sensitivity to this actress or to the racial disparity. And for example, Shogun this year had an interracial couple, and I thought they had excellent chemistry with each other. But I will say that I have a huge criticism in general that I feel that oftentimes when I watch TV, especially contemporary shows, that we're supposed to believe that people are deeply in love with each other, and I feel like no chemistry with the leads. So,
okay, my 2 cents on this. First of all, I love that somebody wrote an email about thoughts they had about our podcast. And I love it when we get emails, whether positive or negative. I just am so excited that people are listening to us and thinking about what we say. As far as the interracial aspect, I guess I appreciate that the sentiment was sincere. And I totally believe that. From my perspective, it was kind of funny because, I am in an interracial marriage and almost everybody I know.
And you guys have terrible chemistry, just so you know.
You've been meaning to mention it. And almost everybody I know who is not white is in an interracial relationship, not necessarily with somebody white, but I'm just saying I know very few relationships that are not interracial, that of people that I'm close with, obviously, not just out in the world. We all have implicit biases, and certainly I am not above having an implicit bias. However, in this particular situation, I don't think I have an implicit bias. And I do like this actress quite a bit. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, she was previously married to Joshua Jackson.
Yes.
Who I love. And I love that marriage. And I was sad when it broke up. So I really don't think I'm bringing that. But Also, what was my also? Oh, when you and I were texting a little bit, I was saying, for example, chemistry, this show is in no way comparable to The Agency, but Scandal, which is like a trashy soap opera, but the chemistry between the lead, Kerry Washington, Olivia Pope, and the president in the Scandal show, Tony Goldwyn, fits off the charts chemistry. I mean, this is like one of the sexiest relationships I've seen on network TV in the last 10 years. And I think that's a very commonly held opinion. So, all this to say, I think our problem is legitimate, but maybe we are beating a dead horse.
Right, right.
And I actually have something new to say about this relationship based on this most recent episode.
Oh, good. I can't wait to hear
Yeah.
about that. A couple more points I made in my response. One is he actually, the listener actually made the point that in reviewing Michael Fassbender's career, he is very good at some things, but really none of those performances, and I checked through them and I agree with this, really show some fiery relationship, chemistry with his female leads. So maybe that is something that he's not great at in general. And as I said before, I don't want to just blame the performers. We've discussed this, and maybe we will stop discussing this on the podcast from this moment forward, especially since we're at the end of the season.
I'm going to try very hard not to beat a dead horse when we talk about this episode, but what I have to say is going to circle back a little bit.
Okay, it's allowable.
Yeah.
If you want to bring it up, I'm totally fine with it. That I wanted to defend that it's not just a performance issue. I think that the show itself wants us to believe, needs us to believe that these people are risking everything to continue this relationship, not to rescue each other's lives, but to simply maintain the relationship. And in so doing, she's endangering her life. He is endangering his whole entire career. It is a very high bar to believe that someone would throw their lives away for someone that they've had this relationship with, that they don't have children with, that they don't have a 25-year life with them, but someone they've known relatively recently. I mean, maybe we don't even know what the extent of this relationship is. I assume years. But this is a pretty high bar to clear, but it is the task they have set themselves to, right? So I need a little more convincing is what I'm saying. And then, and with that, I'll stop complaining.
I also think, and I'll try and make this more of an objective observation about story creation. There are two levels. There's the innate chemistry between two people, which I think arguably can be manufactured between two talented actors, but who knows? Maybe not. And then there's the actual story building of showing us things that make us understand why these two are so attached to each other. For me, we are missing on both levels here.
Right, right.
So I think if I had one, I wouldn't necessarily need the other. But to me, if the innate chemistry is not there, I would have liked to have seen more of why they are bonded together from a story construction perspective, maybe, sharing some vulnerabilities with each other or, something like that.
Right, right.
Final thing to say, which is not appropriate for this discussion or relevant to this discussion. I think interracial relationships are so fascinating and there are so many dynamics. I could talk for hours, but I won't. So go ahead.
In a way, you're kind of touching on something there that is valid as well, that there is a layer when you think about culturally, in the context of the show, they have such different perspectives and worldviews. And once again, this show is not a relationship drama about these two people, but you could even say that her coming from such a different world and him being in London and her having this different life experience and living in this different culture, that in and of itself could be attractive. But once again, this is all we have to invent it in our minds because the show has not built it up itself. Anyway,
Fair.
That being said, Martian's going to risk his life to rescue her.
And we will try not to question it too much.
And we'll just assume it's all perfectly well set up. Anyway, another thing I want to call out that I've been completely wrong about, and this we're finally going to start talking about this episode, was I think just one episode ago or two episodes ago, being like, what's the up with the Danny storyline? I am pretty sure that in the next episode or two, we're not going to see Danny getting on a plane to Iran. Well, we definitely are seeing Danny getting.
Did you
I
say
was
that? I can't even remember that. That's so funny.
100% wrong about that one.
Hysterical.
I might be right about some things, but not about that. Okay, let's get into this episode called the Rubicon. That's something else we get another digression. Crossing the Rubicon. Do you know what the term what this means, this terminology?
I'm Googling it as we speak, but my understanding is it's like a point of no return. Is that
It's exactly
correct?
point of no return, right? And
Yes.
the Rubicon's a river. If anyone doesn't know this, it's a river abuts Italy. And this is when Caesar crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back. This was like when he basically became emperor. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so that's what if you ever wondered what the root of that crossing the Rubicon means. Now, what's interesting, of course, this is the Rubicon. I guess we're looking at some border town, right? This is where we're going to kind of see things. So it's a point of no return, and I think we're going to see a few different things here. A point of no return, not only for maybe Martian's plan to rescue Sammy, although potentially I don't think that's the case because given the framing device we've seen this season of him being injured and being
Right. In the
interviewed,
hospital. Yeah.
right?
Or not in the hospital. Is he in the hospital? I'm not sure. But you know
I
what I mean. All beat
I
up and
I think the assumption they're trying to create the impression that he's in the hospital, but I don't think that's actually the case. Like you
having
mentioned,
medical care of some sort, right? We saw
exactly,
him having some sort of medical attention.
exactly, and we still don't know what that context is. So, I mean, another thing I was wrong about, by the way, I was thinking that last week's episode, or I'm sorry, I should mean this week's episode, would be like a culminating episode, and then we would see a little bit of the Danny story, a little of the fallout of everything that's happening, setting things up for the next season, let's say. That's what my expectation would have been. It really looks like everything is coming to a head next week.
Yeah, I think this was the very typical penultimate episode, which I thought was excellent,
Yeah.
of really moving things forward for the finale. But I often find that I like the penultimate episode better than the finale because of just the way everything starts coming to a head is very exciting often in the next to last episode.
To kind of jump ahead, they are very much setting up a very thrilling episode. Sometimes, like you said, they can be disappointing because things will just wrap up very conveniently or very quickly, but that does not seem to be the case. This show's been pretty methodical in its plotting, so I think that we're going to have a lot of potential outcomes that we're not expecting to have next week. We kick things off. Grandma or Grandpa, I forget which one is which. I think Grandpa is the bald guy, so this is Grandma.
I think that's right.
Basically went and cleaned up after Sammy. They got there before the cleaning crew showed up, so they're pretty certain that everything they found is untouched by the Chinese or any other agencies or any other agents. And there's a note from Osmond to
Hmm.
Martian that says, check your phone. But of course, this is the whole episode is this way. He is obviously distracted by what is happening with Sammy, and yet he has to be on point with this, the culmination of this whole plot. And he has to talk to Langley. Dominic West is on the screen once again. Their contact over in Langley, very angry, and Michael Fassbender and him are yelling at each other. I'm doing a better American accent. No, I'm doing a better American accent. It's very funny. These people are supposed to be Americans. They can't cast Americans in these roles. I don't understand. But anyway, I'm glad to have them here.
Outsourcing is
Honestly.
everywhere.
Exactly. The French show does eventually move from one country to the other. I assume that Martian may very well end up in the US at some point because I assume Dominic West is not only going to ever be on a screen, on a Zoom meeting the whole entire time.
It would
But
be
I
a
guess that
waste of his talent, but who knows?
he could be recording in the next room and they just project him onto the screen. But or maybe he had another show he was shooting, so they're like, we'll just
Right.
record it on Zoom. Don't worry about it. This is an interesting scene because Martian supposedly comes up with their crystal ball plan. It's so top secret, he can't even let Langley know what's going on. And this turns out to be a complete bluff. And
Oh
I've said this
boy.
multiple times in our coverage of the show that Martian seems to be like a real loose cannon. Like he really seems to be flying by the seat of his pants. At this point, it's not just his personal life. He literally is saying, I have absolutely no plan. Everybody's neck's on the line. And I'm just making it up as I go along. And everybody's just kind of like, okay, that's what we're going to do. What do you think about the
Hmm.
dynamic here that like even Bosco and Henry are just kind of shaking their heads and saying, okay, like it's nuts.
This to me is insane in that I guess he has proved himself in the past
Mm-hmm.
such that they are willing to let this happen. But I mean, you're literally talking about lives and secrets at stake.
Right.
So to me, while they are conveying some alarm, it's not even at the degree of alarm that it should be for somebody who's just bluffing their way through this conversation that could result in really dire consequences.
Do you think he just gets away with it because he has like a really good poker face? Is that it?
That's why I'm saying maybe he's proved himself in the past, and that's the backstory we don't know, that they kind of, he always makes it happen. But we're not talking about lying about whatever office project you've got going on, that the report will be done by X date. And everybody's
Right.
kind of like, there's no way in hell you can get this done by X date. But what are the consequences, really? I mean, here, maybe this feels like regular office politics in the CIA. I don't know. Every day you're discussing things where people's lives are at stake. But to me, it was not alarmed enough at his hypothetical crystal ball.
All of this is nuts, and it really made me think about what's being presented here. He is basically a gambler, and like you said, because he's proven himself before, or maybe because he's willing to take it on the chin and take the fall if things go badly, people just let him run with it. But it looks like he's just a gambler who just keeps doubling down and doubling down, and he's been lucky this whole time. But maybe his luck's about to end. He has himself mentioned that he was headed for a hard landing, right?
Yep.
That's a reality that is probably coming. I don't know which one of those hard landings is going to be because your doctor is now in the crosshairs.
Yes, finally, the return of the prodigal brother-in-law.
That's right. And actually that motivates Henry here when we get a little further along in the episode. It's not only that he is obviously just gambling, it's also how everybody else, like you said, is so cavalier about this. It's as if Bosco and Henry are like, well, we don't have a plan, so we'll let him speak up. I guess he can take the fall and, it'll blow back on us in some way, but no one else has a plan. So it's just going to be a lot of yelling in rooms. I think that they probably feel like even if they totally screw up, there's really no way out of this, or no one has any plan to get out of this. So they're just going to let him do what he says and hopefully come up with something. And on the one hand, it seems completely dangerous and a terrible way to run the organization, but it's not like they have any alternatives, right?
It's not like they have any alternatives, but they could be more honest about what the true situation is, right?
Yes, I mean that's the other possibility here, but
Instead
that
of
we've never seen that
assuring them that everything's going to be fine because they've got some super secret idea happening.
But I also think this is like the way politics works as well, right? Where you say you have a plan, you don't take responsibility for something, and then when things go badly, you look for a fall guy. No one's ever on the up and up about all the consequences because they don't want to say the words out loud that we're in a bad situation. So no one wants to ever say that because then you get blamed for it, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
There is some surprising amount of comedy in this episode, by the way, especially early on. What does he end up calling them in the office?
No nut something.
No nut dick clowns, I think he calls them.
Oh, there you go.
And Henry responds to that, dick clowns. It's like he's confused by what that even means.
I am too, to be honest.
But the next scene actually has some comedy in it as well. We see Danny, they're in a recording booth or something. This is interesting. I was like, I couldn't even figure out where they were. I guess they're inside the office building somewhere, but it's like a soundproof booth. But Danny's being grilled by Naomi. And Naomi's always playing mind games with Danny, I feel here. I like how they're playing this role play that she's Iranian and questioning her biography. Once again, by the way, I thought that this felt again like this might have been what I predicted last week, that all of this is a ruse by the CIA testing her, because then eventually she is grilled on exactly the same questions, which is pretty strange. This horse race in this part of Spain she supposedly was born in.
I mean, it sounds pretty cool, though.
It sounds great. I know. Right? I was like, oh, I'm envisioning in my mind. I'm like, oh man,
Yeah,
horse race,
horse race on the beach. Yeah.
how beautiful. Of course, everyone would know about that.
Right.
But then, after she keeps grilling her on these questions and complaining about her not staying in character, then she starts having a casual conversation with her. And she's like, aha, you are a spy. So this is still part of the test. Remember, when you're in Iran, you are always undercover. You will never break your cover. And the biggest comedic beat of this whole thing is when Danny realizes she screwed up and she like swears under her breath. And Naomi goes, "Were her last words ever."
Yes.
But the jokes just keep on coming. This episode has jokes. Directed by Neil Berger, by the way, made some big budget movies, which I wonder if he will direct the finale as well, because maybe they brought somebody in with more action experience. Because I assumed as soon as I saw him on the credits that there might be a lot of action in this episode, but not here. But they are teasing that there might be some action
For
sequence.
sure.
Maybe that's why they brought Neil Berger in for this. But in the next scene, we have Henry very concerned that he knows that Martian is in a bad way, talks to Dr. Blake in an elevator. This whole conversation is very funny. He's like, "Give me your assessment of him. It feels like he has PTSD," which, by the way, may explain some of how erratic he is and how maybe they trust him more than they have in the past. They may not have realized how damaged he is those 6 years.
True.
Although, honestly, they should. But
Right.
but she says, "Here's my assessment. He has PTSD, everything. He's got like a God complex, all these things that happen. He's in complete denial." And so she gives him a full rundown of all his moral complications. She also mentions that I've tried to have conversations with him, but he's always saying that he's way too busy. He can't meet with me. I forget exactly what her terms are, but that's what makes the joke so good, is that then Henry goes, first of all, the funny thing that he does is he says, "Well, I wish you had told me this before I sent him in the field." And she goes, "Can you pull him back?" And he's like, "I sent them out 2 hours ago." So it's like too late. And the other funny thing about it, she says, "Would you like to come in for an assessment?" And he says, "I'd love to, but I'm extremely busy." Exactly word for word what she had said that Martian keeps telling her. Okay, crystal ball. How's this going to work? This is a lot of hand waving, to be honest with you, but it kind of makes sense. And I had a couple of questions as to your understanding of what's happening here as well. So they're looking for weaknesses in Volchuk's team members. Everyone seems really loyal. That's really why they've been vetted, etc. They find one guy that they think could be a good asset very quickly. Owen and Blair are tasked with going through this list of contacts. 4 hours apparently is all they have to accomplish this. They're looking for any kind of weaknesses in these lists of men. They find one particular guy who apparently has been sidelined over and over again. He's been like the chef and the gopher. Not only does it seem like he's been overlooked, they have some evidence by looking at his personal WhatsApp conversations in this group chat that he seems very upset that he's been overlooked over and over again. So they think, okay, this might be our in. Potentially. Martian heads down to see the IT guy. He has to get that phone because, of course, this whole time that he's trying to get this incredibly difficult, impossible, supposedly crystal ball invention that he has going, that he is, of course, thinking about what is on that phone. He goes to sign it out. And once again, all the subterfuge and not bringing people in on how dangerous what's going on is. There's a video from Osman. It shows Sammy is locked up somewhere.
In pain.
Yeah, she's in pain. She's been beat up. She's bruised. He basically says to meet under a bridge. I guess it's the bridge where he first saw him. Oh, and then of course he says, "Hey, can I check out the phone later if I need to?" He drops it on the floor, I guess, so that if it doesn't work later, he can say that he dropped it and that's why it doesn't work. But he's actually taken the SIM card out of it.
Smart.
And actually uses that SIM card, plugs it into his laptop and uses it to text back on the same SIM so that he can continue the conversation and make the meet with Osman. And of course, the video, which if anyone gets suspicious of his activity and goes and looks at the phone, the video won't be there. And he has a little bit of a panic attack, right? In the elevator?
Yeah. So this to me, circling back to when we were talking a few minutes ago about the relationship.
Yes.
This is actually the most emotion I have felt from him
right.
for this woman. And I thought it was really well done. His hands kind of trembling, and I kind of expected him to throw up, maybe even, but I really could feel in this moment in a way I hadn't previously, how much he cares for her and how affected he is by this.
Yeah, I agree. He was very good. And this is once again, maybe intentional or not, the show has made this decision with his performance. He is so closed off. So it is powerful when you see the emotion leaking out. And it does show us that what we're seeing, that impenetrable armor, that he has a lot going on under the surface that we don't see. Anyway,
Well, yes, like I felt, and again, trying hard not to beat a dead horse, but I felt it was ironic that the most emotion I felt for him about this relationship was a scene that she's not even in. He's just there alone.
right. Oftentimes with spy films, with noirs in general, and then like I said before, I kind of think about spy films adjacent to noir genre. There's a lot of the damsel in distress. So I'm glad that she's more than that.
Nice
But we
acting from Fassbender in this scene. He really conveyed a lot.
And then we are in this. Now that I'm thinking it out, I understand what's going on here. I thought, was it just a coincidence that Volchek happens to be heading towards this location in the Ukraine where
Felix.
Operation
Yeah.
Felix is ongoing. And we see these three doctors we've met before. Of course, your favorite, Charlie Remy, is there. Dr. Remy.
Yay, he's back.
He's got some serious cheekbones, this guy does.
Are these actual doctors, do you think?
You know what's funny? I'm actually, because I can't remember anybody's names, I actually have the IMDb open for the episode. They all have doctors as their character names and with their actual names. So I assume they're doctors. They're
Because they
also
seem
spies.
to be providing medical care to
Exactly.
people.
I think that
Yes.
you could not have doctors who are supposedly, moving from one location to another, and then they would not be good at their jobs because that would
Right.
be a dead giveaway. So I assume that they are doctors and spies.
Amazing. Overachievers.
Absolutely. Like it's like Michael Crichton or something. Maybe he was a spy too. Who knows?
Yeah, Michael Crichton was a real overachiever for sure.
For sure. Two of these doctors are actually Ukrainian and have issues with this mission. Basically, what it looks like is that they are redirecting Volchok. But here's where I'm confused. They're redirecting Volchok to this location, which that's the whole idea of getting this asset to get him there, because Felix is already there in place. But Felix is there in place to assassinate somebody, right?
Yes.
And I think it is Volchok that they were there to assassinate. Am I right about that?
I'm unclear about that.
Because that's what didn't make sense to me.
I think it's not. I think it's somebody else.
Okay, that's maybe that was my misunderstanding. For some reason, I thought the assassin target was Volchok, and then I was like, well, then isn't this very similar to what their original intention was?
No, I think it was somebody else, but I think to the extent it's been made clear, I don't think we've been hit over the head with it at all. I think maybe it was mentioned sometime.
I think the only indication this is an assassination, Martian, lays it out. Like who else, what else would they be doing there? These three people working alone. So he seems to be correct about that. But like you said, it has not been indicated earlier.
If anything, they've gone to pains to be saying, we don't talk about Felix. Nobody's supposed to know what Felix is. So, we've been given very little information about it. Like even knowing the name Felix was some sort of failure.
We
right?
weren't even supposed to know. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They've identified this asset potentially. They stand to send him some like pornographic pictures by someone on his WhatsApp chat. Immediately, they reveal themselves to be Volchek, supposedly, but it's actually Martians sending these texts to him. And then a lot of different parts of the plot start coming together. Martian's having a really busy day. Not only is he in the middle of trying to con this guy into becoming an asset, he's actually going to fly out to Belarus to meet with this guy.
Insanely busy, stressful day. Yes.
But in between, maybe on the way to the airport, for all we know, he has to meet with Osmond under the bridge. And I do want to talk about Osmond for a minute, because I texted you immediately when this scene happened. And I was like, oh, Osmond. And maybe I'm overreading this, but it almost made me feel like there's something else going on with Sammy. But that looks like, based on her phone, she actually is at a prison camp, Sudan, right? Sudan?
We thought, oh, we had Osmond wrong, and he actually is looking out for her and cares about her on some level. And now this turn of events was very, we were right all along.
And maybe he's under duress as well. And maybe he is trying to protect her. I'm trying to put a more positive read on it, because it's just odd. Last week, not only did he seem to be sympathetic to her face, and he didn't seem to be lying or manipulating her in some way.
Yeah.
And then later, when they had said to him, take care of her. We'll do the rest. He has this look of concern on his face. Like, what does that mean? Take care of her. Right. So it seemed like he was trying to get her out of the situation without her being too badly injured. And maybe he still is. I mean, maybe he's luring Martian out, presenting the video and threatening her the way he looks like he is. But maybe there is an exchange or something that is possible with Martian that might save her in some way. But I guess that remains to be seen. But I was in the moment, I'm like, oh no,
Yeah.
Osmond,
I
you let me
mean,
down.
maybe, but he seems quite heartless in this episode,
Right now,
particularly.
exactly. With his interactions with Martian, he is very cold.
Yeah.
It's also interesting here when you see Fassbender, very good at this, getting very angry very fast in his demeanor. And when he threatens him that he's like, I should just like kill you and drown you right here, it almost seems like he is considering that, because if he really feels like the Sammy thing is a lost cause, then he really could kill this guy and throw him in the river right now, right?
Yeah.
But Osmond's willing to take that risk, I guess. He's very crude here, very rude to him, of course. And like you said, it does not seem like we see any of the warmth we saw last week here with Osmond.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, Danny is being interrogated by someone else in a very friendly manner by Reza's wife. And she's like, oh, I didn't know you were in London. And I mean, this really shows us that Danny's not ready for prime time. She's not suspicious of this. Even as she's being questioned, she really does think that it is his wife. But of course, he tells her later that it's not his wife, that she's being vetted, because he makes the offer, finally, the approach, come to Iran with me.
I believed it was his wife because I thought she knew that her husband is a bit of a philanderer and so was trying to kind of feel out whether Danny would be the type of person her husband would be into. But then, given everything that happens later, now I wonder if Reza was even genuinely coming on to her or not, or if that was a test as well.
That is an interesting take on it as well. I believed very much so that she was actually the wife, just given some of the interactions they had and the familiarity she seemed to have. But then, given the questions she was asking her, really seemed to be testing her background. I started thinking, is she indeed the wife, but is she the asset? Because, she seemed to be trained at, asking questions and getting somebody off guard in their responses.
Well, that horse race came up again, so it's a good
It
thing she was
certainly did. It
ready.
was very funny that it came up exactly as expected. But then again, if it's that impressive a horse race, then it is good to. Danny does make quite a presentation of her, like, even the way she pronounces it, she's like, I do remember it. I've been coached on this topic.
You turned Russian there for a second, I felt, but okay.
Yeah, he's more of a, yes, exactly. I was trying to go for a little bit of a Spanish, but yeah, it went Russian. Started channeling Volchek. And as I mentioned, Martian's really coming apart. He's about to fly out to Belarus, but we see him back at his apartment at one moment. And this is actually a really cool scene and really shows you where his mental state is. He sees Samia inside of his apartment and then goes and looks for her in there. This is I really like, once again, they're always playing with these like layers of reality and these different layers of glass. And I really like the way that this is almost like a trick of the light that you can imagine that he's seeing in the apartment and thinks that he's seeing her there. Once again, here's Fassbender, not even with a line of dialogue, just doing a lot of work with just his expression there in that moment.
Totally agree.
But then, of course, the next morning, he is dropped off behind enemy lines, a bounce dive, which means that you are dropped behind enemy lines at a very low altitude. And basically, if you disappear, then you're gone for good. But the idea is that you're there for such a short period of time that you're in and out and no one even notices. Mm-hmm. And we actually see this illustrated, right?
Which is good because he's got 48 hours before he has to meet Osmond again.
Exactly. He does. Absolutely. He meets with an agent there, this female agent who's on her phone too much. And he points that out at one point.
Yes.
And he makes the approach. Of course, he knows this poem that they're using because he's the one who set this whole thing up. And as soon as he hands him the envelope of American cash, I knew, like, there's a picture on your phone. Check your phone. There's a photograph there of you accepting cash. And Volchek's going to have you murdered for that. Mm-hmm. But then he tries to do the whole seduction where it's like, but you could be the next Volchek. You've been overlooked too long. And here's your opportunity, right? You can. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's really caught between a rock and a hard place. So he does comply. They follow him back to his house. He has a file that basically explains Volchek's plan or where he's headed. And this is where Martian has the whole conversation with the agent. This is actually intriguing when you think about the context of the show. She goes, I love this type of stuff, dead drops and face to face meetings. And he makes a really valid point, which is just like all those text messages, all those phone calls, all those pin drops on your phone are all being tracked. The only actual privacy you have, the only kind of real spy work you can do is this low level face to face. Maybe he's very old school in that way because she's just like, hey, I'll just sit here until, he texts me and I'll just pick up the file. He is extremely creepy here saying, hey, you're not paying attention to the right things and pretends to shoot her in the head. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She didn't really love that, by the way. And speaking of dead drops, he comes outside and puts something in the garbage can. And that's where he actually gets his hands on this file. And then apparently just zips right back to London to review it with the team.
Yep.
In parallel, we see what's happening with Danny getting ready to get on that plane, which I thought was not going to happen. Well, here it is. She's getting on that plane. I got a question for you. What exactly is happening where Naomi tells her to strip down to her underwear and hand the clothes to grandma? And
Yeah, grandma.
what is he doing? What is happening here? Do you have any idea?
What was happening there?
He goes into the other room with the clothes. Like, are they looking for tracking devices or something? I don't understand.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I thought in the moment watching it, but definitely talking about it with you now, I really don't know. She was saying, here's a new phone.
Yeah.
Maybe they were just replacing everything that she has in case there was some sort of.
Her clothes? I mean,
I don't
maybe,
know.
but I mean, he seems to come back with the clothes. No,
I wasn't paying close enough attention to that, but
I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. Some
for
spycraft that
whatever
involves
reason, she
her
had to get down
disrobing.
to her underwear.
Yes.
And
I
she got
honestly
her
feel
new
like it's just an
phone.
excuse for Naomi to have this like power dynamic with her, to have her undressed in this public
Mm,
place. I also think it's very funny that grandpa just sits there and smirks like, she's going to take her clothes off. I'm like,
yeah,
aren't you a
uh-huh.
spy? You got to be a little more chill than that, dude.
Well, and she says to him, like, hey, no gawking, basically.
Maybe if he hadn't acted like such a weirdo, he could have just subtly sat there and watched, but nope, he had to be a creep. And this is when Martian comes back to Henry with this plan. If we redirect them, we can get him to that clinic. I know Felix is there. He's not supposed to know, but I guess he's sussed this all out. And of course, Henry's really mad because you're not even supposed to know about Henry. He goes, hey, we all know what that is. But he makes a very interesting pitch that you think about once again, how this show is telling us the differences between these supposed separation of your personal priorities and the agency's priorities. But he makes the pitch to Henry. Do you honestly think if there's going to be some kind of assassination at this location with these three guys, that they're going to survive and not be either killed or imprisoned? And of course, if Henry reads things the same way and goes, yeah, this is a suicide mission, if they change the target to be Coyote and returning Coyote to London, then of course that gets his brother-in-law back.
Right.
And Henry probably is friends with this guy, I would assume, and is definitely friends with his wife. And getting your brother-in-law murdered is a good way to end your marriage. That's what I'm trying to say.
Playing into the idea of how your personal interests will affect your work-life decisions at a
For
certain
sure.
point.
I'm just reviewing that scene, and it looks like Martian indicates that they're trying to take out a cabinet minister, a Russian cabinet minister. So it's not Volchek. For some reason in my mind, I'm like, wait a second, it's the same target, but now
Right.
they want to Coyote out instead of killing Volchek. I'm like, wouldn't Volchek probably end up dead anyway? I was so confused. Yeah, it looks like this original target for Felix was apparently to kill some Russian cabinet minister, but I assume not to get the CIA's fingerprints on it because, of course, that would be an international incident.
You would think.
They take the plan over to Bosco. I do like the fact that they're in the hallway, and even though the soundproofing, you can hear him getting yelled at by Dominic West, because you probably heard all that. And apparently they are okay with making this change in target. I do like the way that they get information to the actual doctors, where this woman with an actual baby shows up to start speaking to him in English. Do you think this is realistic at all, that this is actually how the war is being fought over there? How do you think about that while you're watching this? Like, if you had to guess, is this 80% correct or 80% incorrect?
I think things like that probably happen, but not all that frequently, if I have to guess. I
I
mean, I
assume they're
think,
not
yeah, go ahead.
assassinating people left and right for sure.
Fair. there is such an established history of spycraft and things like that, right? That are so fascinating that they do make movies about it. So I
Right.
think these things do happen, but not with the frequency of it being, like an everyday event.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure things like this actually do happen, and we hear about them after that 25-year window or whatever it is. That a lot of times these things are very true to life. I just wonder how accurate things like this are in our current climate. This seems pretty much more like John le Carre, old school. But maybe
Mm,
the whole point of this show is that everything old is new again. That when everybody's doing everything digitally, maybe
right. The
getting
best thing
dropped from a
is,
helicopter behind enemy
right.
lines is the way to meet somebody properly. Meanwhile, Henry has been also doing his own reconnaissance on Sammy and knows everything that's going on with her, right? He knows that she's supposedly left the country to continue working for the museum or whatever organization she works for. But when she landed, that there was a cluster of cell phone signals that approached her. And then the last time that her cell phone was active was near this prison camp in the Sudan. So what we saw in the video probably is accurate. When Osmond showed up, I actually thought, oh, is she still potentially in London? But no, it seems like she is truly locked up somewhere. And he now knows this and does not tell. Maybe he will eventually tell Martian, but doesn't tell him right away because he obviously is more concerned with the success of this current mission.
Hmm.
And now this new asset, this guy who's been overlooked by Volchek, gets on the phone with Volchek and tells him there's a change of location. You're actually going to go meet with Putin. I mean, Volchek is so they actually say this in this episode that his superpower is being super paranoid, so he doesn't trust anyone around him. This guy is super sketchy on this phone conversation with him. And then because Volchek has shown himself to be like so astute at every turn, I was like, oh, he's going to suss it out right away. But Volchek's like basically clicking his heels together. He's so excited. Oh, I'm going to go shake hands with
Yes.
Putin. So maybe it's just too much of what he wanted to hear. But this
Right.
guy is like out of breath. He's, stammering. He sounds terrible in this phone conversation. But it works. Volchek has been redirected to the camp where the Felix doctors are.
Yep.
So as we get to the very end of the episode, we see Martian laying it all out. Here's the plan. This is what we did. We have him redirected. We're going to use the Felix assets to recapture Coyote. And Naomi's here listening to it all. She goes, terrific work.
I just want to jump in to say I like the exchange about Naomi not having the clearance to be in the meeting, but she wanted to be in the meeting and they wanted her in the
Right.
meeting. So they were all like, okay, screw it. We'll just do it anyway. I
Right. Because I
appreciated
mean,
that.
because that seems to be the case with multiple times throughout this show, by the way.
And also, we see a little bit of the history between Martian and Naomi, where he says to her, well, you got me home safe, right? So,
Right. Yeah. Which is nice. And of course, she
yeah,
wants to hear that too. That's a way that
right.
we've heard about him manipulating people, charming them. And I
Yeah.
think that's an interesting form of charm that he has where he's so hard all the time that when it's like that abusive parent, right? It's like when you're
Yes, you're just
so
so
hard all the
grateful.
time, right?
Yes.
Whenever they're nice to you every once in a while. And it's the same thing. In this case, he's not abusive, but he's so withholding in his
Cold.
emotions that when
Yes.
there's a little bit, it's like, oh, he likes me.
Hmm.
And in this moment, everyone's kind of basking in the potential glory that is to come. And we hear Martian narrating over this. The greatest punishment of treachery, he says, is the faces of the people who trust you.
Mm.
So this indicates really bad things because he's narrating this in that interview that when we've seen him multiple
Yeah.
times, the whole framing device on that gurney, injured. Things are going to go really, really badly. I don't know how bad this fallout's going to be. I assume it's not going to be a total catastrophe because I assume he's going to be fired from the agency if that is the case. But, well, it's not going to be good. And we know it involves Sammy, by the way, because he has already, once again, in this framing device, in this flash forward, he's been talking about how that she was basically doomed when, they reconnected in London. So we know things are
Hmm.
going to go badly. It probably involves Sammy. It might even blow up the Coyote exchange. Not sure yet, but it appears to have gone really, really badly. And then at the very end of the episode, we of course see Danny get on that plane. There was something that Reza said to her earlier, and maybe it's just finally dawning on her, but he mentions that they're going to be very close. How did you read that? It almost seems like he's a little wary of putting her into this situation? Or do you think it's maybe another seduction ploy? Like, how did you read that exchange between them?
I didn't really fully understand this whole idea of the vetting because, well, I guess there is this idea, right, that Reza maybe is some sort of operative.
I'm not sure exactly why they're targeting him. I
Because
think,
why the
yeah.
vetting then and why the comments from him about that? Like, it doesn't make any sense if they really are just seismologists.
Well, I don't think that's the case. He is a seismologist, but also that he might be part of the Iranian nuclear program.
Mm.
But in this particular case, he's obviously bringing her not to be involved in the nuclear program, but specifically for the seismological studies. But of course, she's using this as a way to get into Iran and close to these
Yes,
other
no.
people who are involved, right? But to your point, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess he knows that he is has some shady dealings going on. He's maybe a little concerned for her, but that's where like that whole thing, we're going to have to work really closely together. And just his demeanor in saying that, I don't know if that was like paternalistic, stay close to me because bad things can happen. There's some bad people around. Or if it's just like, you got to stay close to me, girl. Let me just put my arm around your shoulders. Like I'm not sure given like some of their interactions in the past.
I felt like I kind of missed a beat in the whole Danny Reza situation in this episode between hiring or not hiring, I don't know, but finding a woman to pretend to be his wife to interrogate her and this conversation. I don't know. I feel like I'm missing a piece and it might be my own fault. I'm not saying the piece isn't there, but there's something I'm not getting, I feel.
I mean, I think it's hard to read some of these scenes, and maybe intentionally so. Maybe we're supposed to be vague on what his intentions really are there. And even her, I mean, you think about her look on that plane, it's like she got exactly what she wanted, and she looks scared, like
Yeah.
literally scared there at the end. So once again, maybe she's finally understanding how far down the rabbit hole she's headed. And then, of course, the final moments. This is a very disturbing scene where we have Martian at his apartment. He's supposed to be meeting with Osmond again. Osmond is at that same location waiting. He doesn't show up. He's calling him incessantly. Martian has the phone face down so he can ignore it and then removes the card from it at the end, right? So he's basically cutting off. And I understand how it is impacting the decisions he's making, but he is potentially killing her at that moment, right?
The text message says he literally has killed her.
Exactly, exactly.
Did this surprise you, this turn of events?
It
Never
did. This
mind what might come later, but just
right.
it's freezing in this moment. Did it surprise you?
The text message itself, or you mean just the fact that he doesn't
That he
show up?
doesn't go back to the bridge, that he doesn't, as far as we have seen so far,
Right.
have some sort of reaction to everything that's happened.
Am I surprised by it? I'm surprised that the Osmond turn happened, given what we saw last week.
Same.
And then I was surprised also because I do assume, based on some of the narration we've heard, that he is going to, swoop in and try to rescue her. And maybe he
Agree.
still will. Maybe there is some backup plan. But at this moment, it really does seem like, when you get that text message and you remove the SIM card from your phone, it does not seem like you are leaving the door open to negotiate with Osmond at that point. I don't expect any of these scenes here for sure.
I agree with you. I felt like, if anything, and I think we're not beating a dead horse when I say this, I think the theme of the show has been
Love is blindness? No.
love is blindness. And so you may act irrationally or without thinking of the consequences of your actions. And so to have this, what appears to be in this moment, hyper rational response that you are not going to sell out your country for this woman that you love, right? Because he's supposed to produce this list of people he contacted in Ethiopia.
Right. Anybody who tried
Um,
to.
Again, in this moment, just taking this moment at face value, that type of hyper rational, logical response seems so unlike the theme of the show and what we've seen from this character. Which, then to lead me to the next thing, makes me think he does have some sort of plan. And we do know he got all banged up somehow, and it has something to do with
Right.
her. So I think there is more to it than what we're seeing in this moment. But my original reaction was surprise.
Yeah, I mean, for all we know, maybe he has assets there at that location. He knows where Osmond's going to be. Maybe he's waiting for Osmond to leave and then get followed. But yeah, at this moment, it seems very bleak. And having Radiohead's "Climbing Up the Wall" being played on the on the soundtrack doesn't help things either. That's usually the sign of bad things. By the way, Sona, we covered the episode of second season of Yellow Jackets where they have their cannibalistic orgy. They play "Climbing Up the Walls" then too. So it's usually bad news when that song's playing.
That's funny.
And yeah, that's the end of the episode. So, Sona, next week we will be doing the wrap up of the finale of season 1 of Agency. First, it'll be before it's Severance. We're covering Severance as well. We did the Severance episode first because it was the premiere, of course. But now we'll do this one first, considering it is probably going to be action packed and, of course, the finale. So this one will be earlier in your feed. These episodes are pretty close together here. And yeah, we're going to blow out the candle on this season of the show.
I'm looking forward to it. I think they really have set up a lot of interesting storylines here.
Yeah, very exciting. All right, so I can't wait to have that next conversation with you, and we'll meet again next week.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks again.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.